Please put your hand on your chest, over your heart, and repeat after me.
There we go.
I pledge allegiance to the
To
flag
the flag of the United States of America,
and to the republic
Republic
which
which
stands
stands one nation under God, indivisible,
with
with
liberty
liberty
and justice for all.
justice for all. Thank you. Approval of the agenda. Do we have any additions, comments, corrections? Or do we have a motion to approve?
Commissioner Duffel, motion to approve, Mr. Chair, as presented.
Thank you, Commissioner. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Commissioner Aragon seconded. Okay, thank you. All in favor? Or do we have to do a roll call?
Yes, roll call vote. Commissioner Aragon,
Aye.
Commissioner Duffel,
Aye.
Vice Chair Nindell,
Aye.
and Chairman Buchanan.
Aye,
Motion passes unanimously.
thank you. Okay, minutes of the Planning Commission regular meeting, April 14th, 2020. Gerald, you've already presented them, so the recommendation is to approve the minutes as presented, excuse me. But are there any corrections?
This is Commissioner Duffel, Mr. Chair.
Yes,
Move to approve the minutes as presented.
thank you, Commissioner. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Commissioner Aragon. And again, we have to do a roll call.
Yes, Commissioner Aragon,
Aye.
Commissioner Duffel,
Aye.
Vice Chair Nindell,
Aye.
and Chairman Buchanan.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you very, very much. Now, at this time, we have some general public comments, I understand. And so I'm going to read the statement, which is going to bore a lot of people, but it's okay because I really do mean this. At this time, pursuant to state law, any person may comment on an item which is not on the agenda. Please state your name for the record. All right. And also, if you have comments on an agenda item, then we'll take those at the time of the agenda item. If not, go right ahead. You have 3 minutes. And all comments are to be directed to the Planning Commission and shall be devoid of any personal attacks. Members of the public are also expected to maintain a professional and courteous decorum during their comments.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Commission, we have 4 individuals that registered for general public comments or non-agenda items. John Barry, Michael Lang, William Clark, and Jason Lee. We can call on John Barry first. So I will.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Barry, are you there? John Barry?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I have no comments at this time. I'm sitting in on the meeting. I may have some comments later on in the meeting, but I have no comments at this point in time. I'm just sitting in as observer, correct, right now.
Okay, thank you. Next speaker is Michael Lang. I don't see Mr. Lang in the speaker queue unless it's a phone number ending in 3499. Mr. Lang, if you are 3499, you can dial *9 on your phone and that'll let me know that it's you. Okay, I don't think it's him. Next speaker is William Clark. Okay, Mr. Clark, can you hear us? Okay, I see that Mr. Clark is here, but he's unmuted, but I do not hear anything. Can go to the next speaker and then we'll go back to Mr. Clark. Next speaker is Jason Lee. Hi, Mr. Lee. Okay, same thing. Mr. Lee is here. He is unmuted. I do not hear him. Okay, we'll go back to William Clark. Mr. Clark, can you hear us? Okay, Mr. Chair, I defer back to you.
All right, we will have an opportunity for anybody who wishes to speak on one of these items that's not on the agenda at the end of the meeting. So for those people who are having some technical difficulties, please hang in there, and at the end of the meeting, we can call on you again. Is that all right with you, Mr. Clerk?
Yes.
Good enough. Okay, let's move on to the first public hearing. Number 1, development permit number 20-3. Oh goodness. Okay, hold on. An application to develop 15 single-family homes within the Eagle Point Specific Plan Residential Development Tract, map number 30539 and 30540. Rebecca Deming.
Actually, it would be me, Mr. Chair. Give me one second.
Thank you, ma'am.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. The project site is for the development of 15 new single-family homes within the Eagle Point residential development. The project is located at the northwest corner of Pearson Boulevard and Golden Eagle Way within the residential low district. Here are some of the existing homes within the residential development that feature different architectural and colors. The proposed elevations have a desert contemporary Mediterranean design and are reversed and staggered to vary the architecture along the street frontages. Shown here is a phasing plan for the project. The applicant has indicated that there will be a total of 6 phases, with the completion date of the project being on September of 2021. Here is a landscape plan that will include a combination of trees, shrubs, and small accent plants to balance the aesthetic and water usage. On September 3rd, 2002, the City Council approved the Eagle Point Specific Plan, track map number 30539 and 30540 for the subdivision of 221 lots and associated improvements. On May 20th, 2003, the City Council approved an amendment to the specific plan to increase the number of lots from 221 to 264. On September 3rd, 2002, the City Council approved the original project and in doing so adopted the mitigated negative declaration for the project. Pursuant to CEQA regulations, once an MND has been adopted for a project, no subsequent environmental review needs to be completed unless there are substantial changes in the project that warrant additional review. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission recommend to City Council for approval of development permit number 20-3, subject to the proposed conditions of approval and findings to develop 15 single-family homes within the Eagle Point Specific specific plan, track map number 30540. That concludes my staff report, and I'm available if you have any questions. I believe the applicant is also here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions from the commission?
Before we get to the applicant, this is Commissioner Duffel. I didn't notice, and I could have overlooked it. I need some help from staff here. Is there anything in the proposals in regards to the fencing?
Yes, the applicant is proposing the continuation of the block wall with the wrought iron access gate on the side.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. That's the only question that I had, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Aragon, you have anything?
No questions.
Okay, Commissioner Nindell.
I do not at this time, no.
Thank you very much. Okay, I don't have any questions at this time. So at this point, I'm going to open the public hearing. Need something to pound here. I guess it's going to be a Tylenol bottle. Anyway, you take what you can get. Okay. Is the applicant present? Mr. Washington, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
Mr. Washington, can you hear
Yes,
us?
I'm present. Can you hear me? Oh, no. Hold on one second. Hold on, sorry about that. Turn this down. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, great.
Okay, do you have a statement, sir?
Basically, no, I just wanted to attend and see how this process works. That's it. I just wanted to attend and see how the process works. I've lived here in Douglas Hot Springs for 20 years. We have opportunity to add to the community, and we want to continue to help the community grow. That's it.
Okay, thank you, sir. Is there any public testimony for those in favor?
Well, I'm in
Mr. Chair,
favor.
Michael Lang registered to speak under this item.
Mr. Lang, are you present?
I just got here.
Thank you, Mr. Lang. Would you like to speak on item number 1? This would be the Eagle Point development.
No, sir.
All right, thank you, sir. Are there any other public comments in favor or opposed or neutral to number 1?
No, Mr. Chair, we have no additional testimony on this item.
Okay, that's fine. So I'm just following the script, which is always fun. So we've covered that area. Now, we don't need a rebuttal from Mr. Washington because there's nothing to rebut. So I'm going to, at this point, close the public hearing. And that's kind of like a going, gone. Okay. And the Planning Commission discussion and questions of staff and recommendations. So let's start with, is there any discussion about this item?
No, sir, Mr. Chair.
All right. Commissioner Aragon, anything?
No questions, no comments.
Thank you, sir. Now, Mr. Nindell, any questions?
No.
Thank you, me either. Okay, so at this point, do we have any questions of staff? None whatsoever? Okay, I'm sorry.
This is Commissioner Duffel. I'd like to move for recommendation to the City Council for approval of development permit number 20-3 to develop 15 single-family homes within the Eagle Point residential development.
Thank you, Commissioner Duffel. You took the words right out of my mouth. So, do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Commissioner Aragon. We need a roll call vote at this point.
Commissioner Aragon,
Aye.
Commissioner Duffel,
Aye.
Vice Chair Nindell,
Aye.
Chairman Buchanan.
Aye. Thank you. So we're getting to
Passes
the main,
unanimously.
we're getting to the main event next. So, and there's quite a bit here. So I'm going to open it up this way. Okay. This is item number 2, environmental findings, general plan, amendment GPA 20-1 and zoning amendment ZA 20-1. I'm going to call on for the staff report. Rebecca, are you giving this one or?
Thank you, Chairman, members of the commission. I do have 3 of our consultants here from MIG to help me answer any questions and present. I have Laura Stetson, Jose Rodriguez, and Bob Prossi, who will, who are here to, they're experts in different areas. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to Jose Rodriguez first to give the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. And thank you, Chairman and members of the Planning Commission. My name is Jose Rodriguez, and I'm a consultant with MIG. I'm actually the project manager for this project, and I've been working really hard with the city of Desert Hot Springs, particularly Rebecca Deming. I'd like to thank all of her hard work in getting up to this point. So let me go ahead and share the presentation. All right, so I am presenting the draft general plan, the zoning code amendments, and the environmental impact report for consideration by the Planning Commission. So on the agenda, I want to talk about the scope of actions that are being considered. I want to talk a little bit about the process, particularly the public engagement process, how we got up to this point. I'll talk about the general plan update and the document itself. A component of the general plan is the 4-year housing element update that I want to also talk about. If you recall, we did bring to the Planning Commission late last year an earlier version of the housing element. This is a new version that actually incorporates a lot of the zoning changes, which I'll also talk about next is the zoning code and map amendments. I'll briefly talk about the environmental impact report, and then we'll turn it over to discussion and recommendations. Scope of actions being considered. So there's the comprehensive general plan update. There's again, the housing element, the zoning code and map amendments. There's also several specific plan repeals that we'll be looking at as we're updating the general plan. Some of these specific plans are older, and so we'll look at recommending repeals for certain specific plans. We'll certify the environmental impact report, and then the general plan and land use policy map changes, as well as some zoning code changes as well that city staff is going to recommend. Again, this is for the Planning Commission. These are all recommendations for the City Council to consider in several weeks. Actually, in 2 weeks specifically. The public engagement. We've had a series of workshops and meetings over the last 2 years. We did have the first kickoff workshop back in May in 2018. We did have a specific workshop to look at land use changes. We've taken the land use map to City Council for review and comments. We had an EIR scoping meeting. We had one specific workshop for the housing element by itself as a requirement by state law. And as I mentioned, we did bring the earlier version of the housing element to the Planning Commission and City Council, where it was open for public comments. And then earlier this year, we had the environmental public review period. And I'll go ahead and later on in the presentation, I'll discuss some of the comments that we received. So here's a photograph of one of the first workshops that we have. It was well attended. And again, a lot of comments on the map itself to get us to this point, the land use map. So let me briefly talk about the general plan itself. By state law, the general plan covers two main areas. Obviously, the city boundary itself, and also covers the sphere of influence. Now, the sphere of influence is areas that are under county jurisdiction, the county of Riverside. The city of Desert Hot Springs doesn't have jurisdiction over development or improvements within those areas, but by state law, the city has to address those areas in the general plan. In the event the city does decide to annex those areas, it has general plan policies and land uses in place. So the general plan itself is a long-term 20-year plan that has a vision, guiding principles. It has goals and policies to look at how Desert Hot Springs will evolve over the next 20 years. It has a variety of components, which we call elements, from land use to mobility and infrastructure, economic development. There's a housing element component, open space and resources, health and wellness, safety and noise, and there's an implementation program at the very end that has specific approaches and programs to implement all the goals and policies in the general plan. So here's a graphic representation of each of the elements. It's a highly graphic general plan with lots of maps and photographs, and it's meant to be easy to read and identify the goals and policies for specific topic areas. Your current general plan land use map, this is the current plan, and this general plan is looking to replace this map. Your general plan map acts as both the land use map as well as a zoning map. So this is the proposed brand new draft land use policy plan. As you can see, this approach in updating this map was meant to provide more of a broader and flexible approach for the plan. Part of this new program is that we're creating a separate zoning map for the city of Desert Hot Springs. This is a requirement by the Housing and Community Development Department from the state as part of the housing element. But it was also something that will be easier for new development to come in, is having a more detailed zoning map. And whereas the general plan will provide more flexibility, by state law, the general plan map, as well as any general plan amendments, can only be changed 4 times a year. So we want some flexibility and a broader approach. The zoning map itself is going to provide the implementation tools and the details and how to implement the general plan. And I'll talk about the zoning map in a bit. So other things that we did to the map was consolidate designations, make it simpler to identify the land uses, and then we did add several new mixed-use designations as well. Our land use legend, we have all our residential categories from rural, desert, all the way to residential high. We have a residential specific plan. We'll talk about some changes to that momentarily. We have our commercial designation, our visitor serving / residential designation, which does cover some of the motels and hotels and resorts. We have the 2 mixed uses I talked about, industrial and open space. So as you can see, these are kind of generalized categories. When you'll see the zoning map, there's way more categories. For example, the commercial will have 4 different commercial designations or districts just for the commercial category. We'll have regional commercial, neighborhood commercial, general commercial, downtown commercial, and even a business park designation. Continuing on the general plan, there is a mobility element that talks about transportation and how do we make streets more complete and not only address automobiles, but pedestrian and bicycle. Again, there's a huge pedestrian safety component. How do we make streets safer with knowing that some of the cars and vehicles travel at high speeds, particularly going down certain streets? How do we make these streets more safer? So there's goals and policies to address those. We integrated the new bicycle plan that was adopted a few years back. We expanded the transit plan, and as development grows outside the city, how does transit respond and accommodate the new growth? We have a new roadway plan. We look at different transportation technology. And so we really look into the future of how transportation is going to change. The economic development looks at some of the established industries, for example, the tourism and cannabis industry. But how do we attract and retain new businesses, particularly in the healthcare, professional office uses, maybe possibly some logistics businesses along the freeway? And then how do we capture local retail dollars? One thing we heard from the community is a need for more restaurants and commercial and entertainment type uses. And so the economic development element has those goals and policies to address those. Open space talks about the parks and conservation of resources, open space areas, the conservation area, as well as aesthetic resources and cultural resources in the community. Health and wellness, again, how do we address some of the chronic issues in the community that, for example, like homelessness, but other health services, making sure that the community has access to healthy foods, senior and childcare services. There's a whole parks component in this particular element, and we expanded the trails plan and how do we connect to some of the surrounding open spaces in the community. And then there's a lifelong learning section with schools and libraries. Safety and noise is expanded. We have various maps to address some of the natural hazards, some of the seismic activities, look at goals and policies, how to address fire and police expansion or increasing services as development and new population come in. Where should we address the new fire station and where are the service areas that are lacking? And then just being prepared and be more resilient as address other types of natural issues and noise issues as well. One of the key things that the general plan looks at, as well as some of the environmental documents, is the impacts to the general plan. One way to look at that is how much new development in terms of number of persons, number of housing units that the current general plan has, and our proposed general plan is proposing, as well as what the baseline conditions are. So baseline meaning what are the number of housing units there are today, and the number of persons in Desert Hot Springs there are today. So the top line, so right now in the city, there's about just under 12,000 housing units just in the city. In the planning area, if you include the sphere, there's a little over 15,000 housing units in Desert Hot Springs, so just under 50,000 people and under 30,000 people in the city. Your currently adopted general plan just in the city itself has an expansive, shows a really high growth. I mean, we're looking at 63,000 new housing units and almost 200,000 persons that the current general plan does project by 2020. So obviously 2020 now, those numbers haven't come to fruition. The one thing we did on the new general plan is we used geographic information system mapping to identify the existing infrastructure, but also existing lot sizes, street conditions, and then even where new master plan housing development would occur, make sure we incorporate there's parks, we incorporate new commercial businesses to serve those, as well as a street system. So even though we're still projecting 34,000 additional housing units, it's the amount of growth is not, it's a little bit more tapered as opposed to the current general plan. So we're still looking at 100,000 persons as in the general plan. Although we don't think that will occur over the next 20 years. That may occur maybe the next 20 to 40 years. And then we do recognize that there may be some other constraints that might limit development. And one constraint is going to be water. We know that there will be water supply issues down the road with climate change, but just the cost of bringing water in to the Coachella Valley may, not I keep using the word may, but will reduce development capacity over the long term. And so I'll go into that a little bit. There are some new goals and policies and some implementation measures to make sure that the city is working with their current water purveyors and suppliers to ensure that the growth that does happen, that there's water available, and vice versa, that growth cannot happen if there's no water. The planning area, if the city does annex those areas, And if development does happen in those areas, the growth then will also be a little bit more, since the area is much larger than the city boundary itself. So again, the proposed general plan does look at a lower build out number over the next 20 to 40 years. In talking with staff, we did recognize that there are some land use map changes that we do need to consider. One is adding a new energy overlay within the sphere of influence, as well as there is one small area way to the west that includes an energy overlay. And this overlay would address many of the wind turbines and some solar farms that are in those locations. And I apologize, this map, there's a later map that I'll show that actually shows the energy overlay that'll include the power plant that's in the middle of the sphere of influence. Another recommended land use map change to consider is a small increase to the cultivation overlay near the intersection of Indian Avenue and the I-10 freeway. Two other map changes to consider is the county facility across the street from the high school. We've designated that as a public institutional designation, but the front part of it should have been commercial. That's what it was recognized earlier with earlier entitlements for commercial. And we want to make sure that we retain that commercial along Pearson Boulevard. And then the other recommendation is the Walmart site, to maintain it as a specific plan, so the development standards that are identified in the specific plan do not change based off the new land use changes that we're making. So again, that changes to maintain the Walmart specific plan along Palm. There are some other text changes in the general plan to consider. One is to the specific plan text, and there's a comment on how often the specific plans should be reviewed by city to determine the appropriateness. We recommended 10 years. There's an additional language to define when that 10-year period will occur. As I mentioned earlier, we are recommending to add an energy overlay. This is the text associated with the overlay. I can go back and kind of go through the details of what the language indicates, but it's primarily indicating that that overlay is to be is an area to be operated and maintained as a wind energy resource area. So as I mentioned earlier, one item that we want to address is the water constraints. And so in talking with some of the water agencies, we did adjust and reflect the general plan language, particularly with build out, and to identify that water supplies are unreliable over the future. And then so we address some of the language to address that long-term or future unpredictability with water, and that may have impact to long-term development capacity in the city. To help address those issues, we've included new goals and policy, or particularly policies, to really work with the water agencies and making sure that there's coordination between the city and the water agencies in terms of infrastructure and coordination with long-term planning with various water documents, and as well as new development occurs in the city of Desert Hot Springs. So again, coordination with new policies with the water agencies. So again, we have a handful of water policies within both the infrastructure element and the open space element, really to address the water supply constraints. And again, here's some additional language about making sure there's balance with water supply and projected growth. So not only did we change those goals and policies in the general plan, but we also updated the implementation program. When's the time frame of some of these programs will be developed, what departments will handle those, and the specific language on how to address those. So this one here is, which also relates to one of the EIR mitigation measures, is that new development won't be approved if development goes beyond what's been identified in an applicable urban water master plan. And so again, it requires the coordination between the city and the various water agencies. again, more implementation measures to ensure consultation between the two or the multiple agencies that supply water. And again, more implementation measures. The various water agencies were able to review these implementation measures and goals and policies, and we've incorporated all of their recommended changes into the general plan. So here is the full draft, the new revised draft general plan. It does incorporate the energy area that I talked about, the expansion of the energy area to include the new, or to include the power plant. It includes the expansion of the cultivation overlay, the Walmart site as a specific plan. And then so we're removing the language that says residential specific plans, since Walmart's not a residential development. So we generalize the specific plan designation and remove the residential component. And this map also does incorporate the commercial along Pearson Boulevard across the street from the high school where the county facility is located. All right, that was the general plan. So one major component, a required state mandated document that the city of Desert Hot Springs is required to update. And unfortunately, the city has been a little bit behind in updating it. It was last due in 2014. We are working really hard with city staff to update the element. The Housing and Community Development Department, which I'll refer to as HCD, has required a two-step program to update the housing element. Like I said, we adopted an earlier version in September, and that was adopted by City Council. We are now looking to update the revised version of the housing element. And what's important about this version of the housing element is it takes into account the zoning changes that we've made. HCD is requiring that we make sure that the city has the zoning in place. So when the housing element's adopted, that the zoning for mixed use, the zoning for higher density residential is incorporated and ready to go. So this is a requirement by the state, and there's some other requirements. Keep in mind, this is still the 5th cycle that we're adopting. In October 2021, the 6th cycle of the housing element will be due. And so the city will be again looking at another update to the housing element within the next few years. Just real briefly, for those that are new or don't understand what the housing element consists of, I just want to talk about some of the components of the housing element. It has a needs assessment section that looks at current demographic trends and some special groups that are identified that may have some housing needs. It looks at all the different constraints, whether there's some governmental constraints, the zoning may be too strict, or it doesn't allow additional new housing element that the state's requiring. It may even look at some market constraints. There's an entire resource section that looks at where all this housing can be accommodated and to make sure the city can accommodate this housing. I'll look at other financial and administrative resources. And then what's based on the previous housing elements, how has it been progressing with previous approvals of housing elements, and how is it progressing? It all comes together into a housing plan. The key thing on the housing element is that the city has to accommodate, over the last 2 cycles, nearly 7,500 new housing units at various income levels. And so that's one thing that this new land use plan, together with the housing element, is being able to accommodate and with those land use changes up to 7,500 new housing units. HCD has really looked at those sites closely. We used some of the specific plans that are in place to accommodate some of those housing units, but within the new mixed use areas along Pearson and Palm, and particularly around where infrastructure is in place near downtown, we did create some higher density areas, particularly along Palm, to accommodate this growth that the state is requiring the city to accommodate. And then this map here shows where those particular sites and housing is being located. So those kind of salmon pink color areas is those existing specific plans that could accommodate some housing, and then the green areas and the blue areas is where some of the mixed use and some higher density residential designations that are being applied in the zoning and general plan to be accommodated, whether it's on vacant site, and then which cycle of the housing element, the fourth or fifth cycle, is being accommodated or being addressed into. And then the housing element in the appendix does identify every single parcel that's being able to accommodate a regional, one of the housing requirements from the state, and then how many units it's being applied. And then it identifies each APN number and what's the maximum density, the realistic capacity. So it's a complete inventory of all those housing units, and to make sure that we're able to accommodate the 7,500 units. And this is what HCD has reviewed. The zoning code amendment. So in addition to the general plan, we are updating the zoning code. We're mostly focusing the zoning code to reflect what HCD and in the housing element is required for this fifth cycle, because the state and HCD really wants to have the zoning in place. Since the city is a little bit behind on the housing element, the HCD is requiring that we update the residential sections to accommodate all the various residential development that we've identified with the 7,500, make sure the mixed use designations are in place. To help the city, and particularly with the new land use changes we're making, we've also updated the commercial industrial use tables that identify where conditional use permits are allowed, where permitted uses are allowed. Each use table will now have a definition. So if you look at a specific use, there will be a precise definition for that particular use. And to help staff a little bit, we did introduce an administrative conditional use permit that could be done. It's still a discretionary permit that's approved at the director level, and it's only for certain type of development. Still, conditional use permits will still require to go to the Planning Commission for approval. And then there is an administrative chapter that shows that review authority and what it applies to. But most importantly, there is a new zoning map. So not only do you have just one map, you have the general plan, you now have a new zoning map. And this is again required by state, but not only is it required by state, it's just good practice to have a more detailed, specific zoning map that'll address the land use changes we made, but it'll target specific sites for specific development, and it'll reflect the use tables that we just updated. So the good news is you're gonna have a really good first part of the zoning code. Again, this was a targeted zoning code. This is not a comprehensive zoning code update. We really looked at the zoning code changes that HCD is really looking at, but also to help streamline a little bit of new development to come in, particularly commercial industrial areas. So you'll see the new use tables will reflect that for commercial and industrial. So with residential, again, I talked about having new use tables, so you can see all the various uses that are allowed in the residential sections, and they'll have whether it's conditional use permit, it's an accessory use. For example, there, a private garden is an accessory use, but also the accessory dwelling units that are required by the state, those are permitted uses. And we've updated the development standards. We make sure we removed any inconsistencies and make sure that they reflect the general plan densities and a little bit more easier to use development standards for residential districts. As I mentioned, we updated the commercial and visitor serving districts with new use tables. You can see all the uses to the left. And as I mentioned, each use will have its own definition. So we have an expanded definition section that's many, many, many pages. Industrial uses, as I mentioned, we also updated those. New to the zoning, the zoning code is the mixed use chapter. It addresses both new use tables and the standards for new mixed use development. We have our mixed use neighborhood and our mixed use corridor. The mixed use neighborhood is meant to be a little bit less intensive, and the corridor is really meant to be on Palm and Pearson. And so the use table identifies all the uses allowed for mixed use. It will allow horizontal mixed use, it has the option of having a residential development or a commercial standalone development. And then there's a table associated with all the standards for each of those districts. There is another one that's called the visitor serving mixed. And that is essentially kind of like a mixed use district. And this is within the hot water overlay area where there is some residential development adjacent with some vacant lots that are adjacent that could allow some residential development. Some more of the larger development we've excluded or don't allow residential. It's primarily for commercial resorts. So that has been updated with this section as well. The administrative section chapter we've also addressed and make it really clear who has the authority for particular development. When does it come to the planning commission? When does it come to the director? And then when does it go to the city council? Now, this is only a snippet of the review authority. This table is actually several pages long. When we get to conditional use permits or some of the more intensive development permits, the planning commission, the city council do get involved. Here's an example of the text section. There's several pages of the document. And as I mentioned, the definition sections is expanded to address all the new uses. This is the draft zoning map. The zoning map only applies to the incorporated city of Desert Hot Springs boundary. It does not apply to any of the sphere of influence. That's only a general plan requirement. The county of Riverside still has full jurisdiction in terms of permitting entitlements in the sphere of influence. But the zoning map, again, as I mentioned, has more detailed, has more categories than the general plan. As I mentioned, the commercial has a handful of new designations. The industrial has also several designations. We included a new business park category for certain areas. And so the zoning map has been expanded. A couple of zoning map corrections that we want, that city staff is recommending, and some of these kind of correlate with the general plan. And again, I won't go to detail, but the Riverside County property and converting the front part to commercial, we want to make a recommendation to, and also an expansion of the cultivation overlay boundary, again at Indian and the I-10 freeway, and it's only covering the properties at the very corner. And this was identified earlier in the general plan. And so this is the full revised general plan that incorporates those changes, and staff will request that Planning Commission recommend. Some minor zoning text amendments. So when we do update a zoning code, there are down the road, staff will identify some changes or things that were missed. And so there's a couple of changes we've caught early on to make it consistent. There was some inconsistency between the multifamily housing standards. So these are some of the changes that staff is recommending. Some minor changes to ensure consistency and not make it harder for anyone that's developing particular properties. All right, almost to the end here, I think a little more than halfway. So the next section here is on the repealing of the specific plans. There are a handful of specific plans in the community that were adopted fairly long ago. Some of them just the city was just didn't work out, or that the market conditions have changed, or that we've addressed, that we put in the general plan new designations that might that have a better meeting the goals and policies of the general plan. And so staff is recommending that we repeal these specific plans. Many of these are over 10 years old. And the map on the next page here identifies those specific plans. Not only are these older specific plans, but some of these have already been fully developed. And so it might make sense to have the zoning standards kind of apply as opposed to the outdated specific plan standards. And another issue why we're rescinding some of the, or repealing some of these specific plans is they've been purchased off for conservation purposes. So like, for example, the Indigo Lake specific plan and the Vista Del Monte specific plan, those areas have primarily been purchased for conservation pursuits. The Vista Del Monte specific plan does have a commercial center at the very corner, but the general plan and the zoning standards will go ahead and take place or precedence as this specific plan is repealed, since the future development for the remaining areas won't apply. Let me move on to the environmental impact report. I'm going to give a brief presentation Bob Prossi and his team, who's developed and prepared the environmental impact report, is at this meeting today and could answer any other additional questions after the presentation. I'm going to provide a quick overview of the environmental impact report. It's an extensive document that really looks at the impacts based off the general plan and the land use map, as well as the zoning changes. There's an executive summary, what the project description entails, the impact analysis. We also looked at some development alternatives on what can reduce some of the impacts to development. There's a conclusion, appendices, and then what's important is that the environmental impact report gets reviewed by the public. There was a 45-day public review period that ended in, I believe it started in February and ended in early April. And there was a handful of comments that we received from the public. And by law, we're in good practice required to respond to those comments, specifically if they are, if there's something they identified in the EIR that needs to be addressed. With the EIR, there are some impacts that cannot be mitigated. And so there's some significant impacts that the city council, as well as planning commission, will have to look at in terms of accepting some of those impacts that cannot be mitigated. And then there's an entire mitigation monitoring program that's associated with the EIR that helps the city over the long term to make sure that the city is following through on the mitigation measures identified in the EIR. So as part of this program, there's a whole host of topic areas that the EIR reviews. I'm not going to list them all, but the ones in purple are the ones that have mitigation measures that are addressing some of the impacts. Some of the more common ones that we see in general plan EIRs is air quality, biological resources, because Desert Hot Springs such has a large conservation areas with the washes and the habitat areas. And so there are some impacts associated with those, but those have been mitigated. So much development. There are some greenhouse gas emissions, hydrology and water quality mitigations that have been applied, and some noise. Additional impact, additional topic areas, as well as mitigation measures that applied are to public services, transportation and traffic, and then utility and service systems. So on April 1st, and a couple of comments after the April deadline, we did receive written comments on the EIR. Some of the ones that we looked at and addressing were the ones from the water agencies in making sure that there's good cooperation with those agencies. And so all the implementation measures have been included in the general plan, as well as the goals and policies. There was several comments regarding the energy and making sure that the renewable energy and with the wind turbines and making sure that the city looks to kind of protect those areas, and so that we therefore included the overlay areas. And then some other areas where we got some comments, but they weren't that we're able to address fairly easily. There was one mitigation measure that the water agency that we definitely we incorporated into the general plan, some changes into the implementation measure. So recommendations. Nearing the end of the presentation. Again, City Council makes the final approval of the documents, particularly for the general plan, the zoning code, and certifying the EIR. As a planning commission, you're looking at approving a resolution that recommends to the City Council certified environmental impact report, adopting the findings of facts regarding pursuant to the California Environmental Quality Act, and adopting a statement of overriding considerations, approving the general plan amendments and the land use map, the amendments to the general plan and the land use map for several properties. There's the resolution to recommend to the City Council that they repeal the following specific plans that were shown on the screen and that are listed here. There are eight different specific plans. then there's a resolution for the zoning code to recommend to the city council to amend the following chapters that I talked about earlier with the residential districts, the definition sections, the commercial districts, the administrative use permits, and the administration section, also addressing the zoning map. The last thing to consider is the changes that I talked about in this presentation. There's a recommendation to include the revisions to the general plan update, the zoning code, and the EIR as recommended by city staff and identified during the staff presentation. There's a recommendation that staff review the wind energy policies that were provided by one of the comment letters. We are going to include the energy overlay, but that we ask that if we can down the road take a look at the goals and policies that were recommended by a response letter and include at a future update, include those at a later date when the city does require to update the zoning code. And then the last recommendation is to allow city staff to have the ability just to make some minor revisions to the general plan or zoning code, only to address any typographical errors, technical corrections prior to the city council meeting. And then anything that we do find, I'm not saying that we caught anything, but if there is something that we caught that, you know, it's a technical error or a correction, that we give it to the city council over the next two weeks before the public hearing for the city council in the form of an errata. And then we will not be making any substantial or substantive changes to the document, to the zoning code that'll affect the environmental impact report. So with that, that concludes my presentation. I'll turn it back over to Rebecca and open it for any questions and comments. I'll be available from MIG to answer any questions. Laura Stetson, who is the principal in charge for this general plan program, is also available to answer any questions. And then Bob Prosty, who prepared the environmental impact report and all the response to comments and final EIR, that will be also available to answer any questions. Thank you.
So Chairman, I turn it over to you to answer any questions council or commission has at this point, and go from there.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from Mr. Rodriguez from the commission?
Mr. Chair, this is Commissioner Duffel. I do have a few questions for Mr. Rodriguez.
Go ahead. We have a screen up from Mr. Rodriguez that maybe shouldn't be here. I don't know.
I am trying to see if I can remove that, so I do apologize. Give me 1 second while I try to figure this out here.
Quite all right.
Oh, there we go.
There we go. Now we have you live.
Fantastic. Mr. Rodriguez, thank you for your presentation. It was quite extensive, and to be honest with you, I am impressed. You've done a wonderful job. I do have a few questions for you. In regards to the housing element, is there anything in here, any provisions in here protecting any current property owners, say from loss of equity in their home from a low-income residents, say, moving into an infill lot right down the street? Or are we going to be able to do something to protect our current homeowners' investments in their property? Or are we kind of, our hands kind of tied in regards to what the state wants and what we're able to do?
So I can go ahead and take that. Our hands are definitely tied. Our direction and from HCD and what they review is to make us remove barriers to construction for low-income housing. So unfortunately, we're not, you know, they definitely look at that. They looked at our amendments, they looked at our zoning and densities, and they looked at, they even asked us to send them any of our building code amendments when we adopted it to ensure that the city was not increasing barriers to housing development and low-income housing development. So the state has kind of overridden us the ability, you know, or worry about property values in favor of their policy to increase housing supply for everybody.
I think that was kind of the answer I was anticipating. I just wanted to make sure that that the public was aware of that as well. My other question is, have we taken a look at, I know we've looked at roads in the general plan. Have we taken a look at some of our major arterial roads, such as Palm Drive, Indian Avenue, Little Morongo Road, Hacienda, between Choya and Little Morongo, Dillon Road, and Mountain View, as far as road widening expansions, getting that set up into the general plan, so that as we look into the future, we're ready to rock and roll and we don't lock ourselves out of creating more road space if needed in the major arterial roadways into the city.
So part of this process, and I can turn it over to Jose and Bob to help answer if additional details are needed, but part of what the process is to take that full build out that we discussed at the beginning and run traffic studies to make sure that our arteries and our roads can handle the amount of traffic that's being proposed. So we definitely, one of the things that I directed MIG to do is to not just look at what we really think is going to be built over the horizon year, as he mentioned. We really looked at more of what we think the build out of the whole city would be, whether it's 20 years from now, whether it's 100 years from now. We wanted to make sure that we were planning now to make sure that we covered what, based on this vision in this general plan, would be of what the total build out would be. And we did those traffic studies, and that mobility element is based on being able to handle the traffic needed at build out.
Okay, fantastic, Rebecca. Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Mr. Chair. That was the only questions that I had for now.
Thank you, Mr. Duffel. By the way, you asked one of my questions and it got an answer, so that's great. Who's next? Commissioner Aragon, do you have questions?
No question. My question was going to be in regards to traffic and road conditions, so to answer that.
Right. So you and I will probably piggyback on something later on that. Mr. Nindell, do you have anything?
Well, kind of. It's sort of a thought and a question. Is the general plan considered a sort of a living document that could, fairly easily be updated on a regular basis, so you don't have to wait 10 years or 20 years or anything like that? The reason I ask is because the virus. I mean, the city's going to be, I think, a very different place a year from now. The problems we've seen in many respects will be worse probably. And I guess what I'm wondering is it enough of a living document that the impacts we see a year from now might require changes to the general plan, and specifically what types of things would change, I guess, is what I'm asking.
So it is definitely a living document. It is meant to be updated as the city's vision changes. Every element except the housing element is able to be updated basically as we need. The housing element has a state mandated timeline and has to follow different requirements. And the housing element is also the only element that has to get approval by the state, where the other elements are just approved by the city. However, it really is supposed to be also a long-term document that is restricted on how many times we can update it. As mentioned earlier, it's 4 times a year. So for instance, once we do this, we'll only have 3 more possible updates in this calendar year to do updates. That doesn't mean that there's not flexibility. If, for instance, we wanted to change the map around, we could do multiple changes as long as it was one update of the land use map or one update of the element. We would still leave some flexibility into the future. One of the things that I wanted to make sure we did, and I worked with MIG, was to simplify, as mentioned, the general plan so that the details that we might want to change are in the zoning ordinance, which has no requirement or limitation. So by making, under the old process, we had all of a good example is all of the commercial zones were separated in the general plan. So if someone wanted to change their designation from commercial general to community commercial or vice versa, they had to do a general plan amendment, which we had limitations on. Now, by having a much more general plan that it's all just commercial, those changes are only needed to be made on the zoning update to try and meet those requirements of a changing need. So as long as we keep the commercial where we want the commercial and the industrial where we want the industrial, all of the other changes we might see by different types of uses that might be coming or different types of changing markets, we'd be able to do through the zoning update, which there are no restrictions on, and really is a true living document to the current direction of the council.
Well, I mean, one area that comes to my mind is transportation within the city. I mean, I'm no economist, but if unemployment is high, people can't make car payments. They can't make car payments, they have to rely on public transportation. Well, we have a bus route that's pretty limited through the city. I mean, it's basically up Palm Drive and down Hacienda. It doesn't go, you know, all around. So to me, that has an impact on buildings, making sure there are facilities for buses and carpooling, things like that, and parking, things like that.
And so that's considered within the general plan. One of the requirements in our mitigation measures is to do updated plans for transportation, like a multimodal plan, how people can get around either by bike or bus. And so that's something that we're actually going to be required to be updating. I don't remember if it's a 5-year or a 10-year phase, but that is something that we are actually required to look at and make sure that we're covering our needs. Most likely due to this COVID-19, I'm actually glad that it's a little further out, closer to a 5-year or 10-year timeline. That way we can kind of wait till this is over and really see what the current needs will be of the city to update our plans.
Okay.
Okay, anything else, Jim? Okay, I have a couple of comments and probably a couple of questions. My first comment is, you guys have done a magnificent job. This is really, really hard work. Now, understand this because we will be hearing from many people. I have a stack of letters that I expect that we'll be hearing from a number of these people and others about this plan, and that no general plan will ever satisfy everybody all the time. And so we need to be cognizant of that. We also need to be cognizant of the idea that we can make occasional adjustments. I think that the vice chair's comments are completely appropriate. I liked the general plan. I thought you guys did a really good job. Jose, congratulations. However, a couple of small points. One is, I thought that the traffic plan is, again, that's my wheelhouse, I'm sorry, but I thought it was pretty weak. And I also have the concerns that Commissioner Nindell has on public transit. I don't know what things are going to look like a year from now. I don't think anybody does, but it's going to be interesting. We live in interesting times, so there we are. You've put together, I think, a plan that allows for flexibility, which is great, but there's always going to be some who will have their own special interests in mind and want those interests served rather than the general public. So this is a hard thing to do, and we know that, and we know the final determination is going to be in the hands of the city council. However, we do need to know a couple of things. One is the state has mandates, and those are important, and we need to follow those mandates. We are a part of the state of California. That's the way things work. We're not an independent country, and thank God we're not. I don't know. I don't want to do our own defense court. But at the same time, understanding that we are a unique community, and we need to keep in mind that many people live here for many different reasons. And so we have to be at least sensitive to people's feelings. I read the more than a dozen letters that came in, and I understand almost all of it, but obviously not all of it, and saw that most people have legitimate questions. Many people have questions that are designed for their own special interest. And I got that. I understand that. I think everybody does. But that's kind of the way things work. But I want to congratulate the department. Rebecca, you've done a marvelous job. The plan looks beautiful, and I think it'll be very useful going down the line. I just want to make sure it's flexible and that we're able to make changes as we go along, because we'll have to, and that we make accommodations for people's specific needs that we may or may not know about today. Okay, that's all I have to say.
So if I can address that, Chairman, we have, like you said, a few limitations. Beyond the limitations of the state mandates, we are also limited in making changes as they have to be in compliant with our environmental impact report. If we approve changes to uses that would increase the density or intensity of a project, that would be problematic for our EIR. So although if we're unable to meet those requests now, that doesn't mean that someone couldn't apply on their own and do their own environmental to do those changes in the future. We just wouldn't be able to do them as a city initiated change as part of this environmental document, because our studies are very specific to the land use map that was approved by, or recommended to move forward with the environmental by City Council last February. So although we do want to be considerate of these requests, we run into an issue that when it does intensify the project, for instance, going from residential to commercial or industrial and that kind of thing, in other words, intensifying what could be developed on it, could be problematic, even though we may agree with the land use change. At this time, we might be constrained. So we've got our environmental team, like I said, here to help us work through those navigations and give their opinion on whether there is an environmental constraint or not to looking at those requests. And then also we've got Jose and Laura here if there's a question on whether it's a state mandated change that you guys are asking for or that the public's asking for, we can make sure that our allowable use table is meeting all of the state requirements and our standards are meeting all the state requirements.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Again, splendid job. Anybody else have anything before we go into the public comment section? Okay, I don't hear anything. So at this point, Gerald, are you here?
I'm here.
Great. Do we want to go with your list on the public comments?
Yes, actually, before we proceed to public testimony from those who are joining us this evening, I'd like to just note for the record the written testimony that we received, and that was distributed to the Planning Commission prior to this hearing. So the city has received written testimony from the Coachella Valley Water District, Desert Water Agency, Eddie Adkisson, Fred Noble, Jim Snellenberger, Michael Lang, Nathan Bouvet, Richard Candelaria, Richard Clausen, Shada Ibrahimi, and the Inland Counties Legal Services / Public Interest Law Project.
And they will all be made part of the record, correct?
Correct. Part of the record and then available upon request to anyone wishing to receive a copy of them.
Thank you. Okay, with that, we open the public comments. I'm just going to open up to generally to those who are in favor, opposed, or have a neutral position. I believe you have a list of people who want to speak, Gerald?
Yes, so I have the list in the order of which they registered, so we can call on like the first 3 people so that they're prepared, and then just go on down the list. And then anyone who is having technical difficulties on their end, we can circle back at the end and then allow them the opportunity to speak if they weren't able to.
Thank you very much. So that's how we're going to do it. Gerald, call the first speaker, please.
Okay, the first three will be Jim Snellenberger, John Barry, and Shada Ibrahimi. So Jim Snellenberger. Just bear with me.
Hello? Yes, I'm here.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Snellenberger.
Yes, I would just like to say we have the 85 acres on Palm and Dillon, and you're rezoning that into commercial right now, and we're in favor of the general plan. And I would just like to say what a pleasure it's been working with Rebecca along the way. And we'll keep it short. That's it.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, next speaker is John Barry.
Yes, again, primarily sitting in an observer, we do have a project that we're working on in the future. And I would just like to say it sounds like the city staff there has just done an outstanding job in terms of looking at all of the issues with everything. Has been very cooperative and very very amenable in working with them at this point in time, and we're just really happy and pleased to be working or potentially future working with the city of Desert Hot Springs. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Barry. Who's next, Joe?
Next speaker is Shada Ibrahimi.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. I did send a letter in talking about the project I'm planning to do on my 5-acre property, a sustainable retreat center. Love the city of Desert Hot Springs. I also own a home here, and I would love to continue building that retreat center if the zoning allows. So that's all. Thank you all.
Okay, Mr. Chair, so the next three speakers will be Josie Herndon, Virginia Butler, and Fred Noble.
Great.
So Josie.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, thank you, Chairman and members of the Commission. We're working on a project at the address 12885 Alicio Road. You probably aren't that familiar with it at the moment, but it's being rezoned now as VS-M. And our project is going to be a chronic pain detox facility. So it would be residential care, no more than 30 days for chronic pain clients that are addicted to opiates. And we wanted to use the Hot Springs and the retreat center to do detox. I just wanted to make sure that this new zoning would permit that. Under VS-M, according to your new map.
Okay.
Before
Are you asking a question of?
yeah, I'm asking a question because it's being rezoned now as of this new meeting. So before purchasing the property and starting the project, I just wanted to know if that would be permitted, or would we have to go through a different process? I was advised to get on the call tonight, so.
Okay, could you do me a favor, please, and repeat the address?
The address is 12885 Alicio Road.
Okay. Okay, how should we handle this, Rebecca? This is actually a question for staff. I pretty much know the answer, but at the same time, I don't want to get out in front of anybody. So how would we handle this?
So you have a few options. Normally you take all public comment and we'll write down all questions. And then once we're done, the chairman can direct staff to respond. I am writing down all the corrections so that I am ready to respond at the end of receiving all public comment.
Okay, thank you. And thank you so much for all of the work that you are all doing. It sounds like wonderful for Desert Hot Springs. I'm a resident of Palm Desert, and I, for 20 years, go to your hot springs, and that's why I'm looking forward to starting a business in Desert Hot Springs. Thank you.
All right, I appreciate your call, and thank you, Rebecca, so that we'll follow that, because I think that's excellent advice about how to handle this sort of thing. All right, next.
Next speaker is Virginia Butler.
Ms. Butler, are you there?
Hi, I'm Virginia Butler. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, ma'am.
Excellent, cool. So I'm actually, a nice follow-up to Josie, is I'm actually the owner of 12885 Alicio Road. And so my question sort of relates to Josie's as well. So it might kind of piggyback off that once we know the answer, but it was originally under commercial. So I'm just kind of wondering the restrictions, and I spoke with Rebecca earlier today. And so thank you for that, Rebecca. That was really helpful chatting to you. You've been great. I just kind of want to know from where we currently are as commercial changing into this new zoning amendment, how that kind of restricts us in any way in terms of development on the vacant lots either side. And I see across the street on Hacienda on the other side that is remaining commercial and not changing to the VS visitor servicing mixed use. So I'm just wondering why there's some sides of the street are going to commercial and some are changing to this VSM, and just kind of what restrictions that puts on us. In particular, if Josie buys the property, what does that mean in terms of, you know, changing what is done there, and that kind of thing. So I guess it kind of, that will all be revealed once we find the answer, which I believe is following up at the end of all of this. So I guess I'll just leave it at that, really, and that will be answered in due course. Is that kind of the best course of action?
That sounds appropriate. Thank you very much, Ms. Butler.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for your time.
All right. Who's next? Mr. Noble?
Yes, next speaker is Fred Noble.
Fred, are you there?
I hope so. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Oh, excellent. Well, I'm Fred Noble, Wintec Energy, and our issues have to do with the pre-general planning on the sphere of influence south of Pearson, down to Dillon, and west of Indian Avenue. It's the big blue piece in the earlier map that you saw. This is probably, between there and the freeway, is generally considered to be the best place for renewable energy in the world. If you add everything up, which is good wind, good sun, big electrical infrastructure, and transportation. There are now more than $2 billion of assets in that general area. And in the area that you are identifying in the general plan as industrial, will easily take another $2 billion of renewable assets over the next probably 7 or 8 years, maybe sooner. The day may come when the city annexes this property, and we would need to be sure that the general plan allows us to continue operating and to expand as necessary, realizing that the ultimate project is always a CUP process with the Planning Commission and the City Council. But what you've got here is another source of revenue for the city, and we're some distance from many of the residents. We annexed part of our land into Palm Springs some years ago down by the freeway, and we gave them a second income stream beside just tourists. $1 billion asset pays a lot of property taxes, and it's generally considered to be environmentally desirable use. The staff addressed all of our concerns as it relates to the general plan, and we appreciate very much their help in realizing what we have here. Because in the long run, this whole region will be the environmental capital of the world, at least the renewable energy capital. And Desert Hot Springs should be part of it. And so we appreciate the notion that this area where there are no residents now, except maybe one or two, will be used as part of the expansion of the renewable energy industry. So thank you for your time, and I wanted to just go on record as explaining why we had the concerns which have now been resolved.
Thank you, Mr. Noble. Really appreciate your call. Gerald, who's next?
Okay, next three speakers will be Emmanuel, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing this, Zareb, Michael Lang, and then Nathan Bouvet. So Emmanuel.
Hi there, this is Emmanuel. I am Emmanuel Zareb. Thank you very much for having me, and it's so well run, and looks like you guys are doing such a great job for the Desert Hot Springs. I'm just following up again with Virginia regarding the property on Alicia Road. It was just to find out because I'm helping her sell it. I've helped her purchase it. And it was just to have some clarification on what can happen afterward because of the whole mixed use and going from a hotel to the properties that they're trying to do afterwards. So it's just earlier I signed on for this, but they asked a question that you guys would be answering. So I won't waste any more time, but thank you for having me.
Thank you, sir. And it's Zareb?
Zareb, yeah.
Zareb. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, who's next?
Next speaker is Michael Lang.
Mr. Lang.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, sir.
Oh, good. Yes, I submitted something in writing earlier today, and it's basically objecting to the proposed changes to the zoning affecting my property. It's parcel number 665210001, and it's a 59-acre parcel at Little Morongo and 20th. It's alongside the proposed water sanitation or treatment facility, and it's also intermixed within the cannabis area, light industrial. For the 20 years that I've owned the property, it's always been designated and zoned as light industrial, and I thought it would continue on that way. And it's my understanding that now the change that will be going into effect will cause it to be either, excuse me?
Go ahead, sir.
Oh,
Sorry.
I'm sorry. Open space and light, not light industrial, but low density residential, allowing one house, I believe, for every 5 acres. But because it's in the protected species zone overlay as well, it would only allow one house, one single family residence to be built on the entire 59 acres. I think that's not only wasteful for my use, but for the city of Desert Hot Springs in generating any type source of revenue for a cannabis facility or what have you, even on a 5 or 6 acre piece of the parcel. So I wish that the council would consider allowing me to continue on with the designation of light industrial zoning for my parcel to not only benefit myself, but to benefit the city for revenues, for taxation purposes, and what have you. Also, in some of the other comments with respect to wind and solar and renewable energy use, the 59 acres would be certainly a good candidate for that, since it is in that corridor with all of the other windmills and solar installations. So I just like all of you to consider that, and I hope that my property retains the light industrial designation that it has had for the past 20 years.
All right, thank you, Mr. Lang. Again, this will be one of the questions that Rebecca will be answering at the end of this process. So, who's next? Yeah, thank you. Who's next, Joe?
Next is Nathan Bouvet. I do not see his name under the attendee list, but there is someone joining us with a phone number with the area code 702. We can try to see if that is Mr. Bouvet.
Probably is.
That's me, Gerald.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So just to reiterate, I'm Nathan Bouvet. I represent Don Clausen of Dillon Road, LLC. I've been listening to the presentation. I think what you're proposing to do is good for the city of Desert Hot Springs. I do represent a project that's going to be known as Desert RV Storage. This is a project located at 66135 Dillon Road. It's further known as APN 657220003, just southwest of the Palm Drive Dillon Road intersection. What we've been in the process of doing, and we've forwarded plans and documents and such to the planning department to get some cursory comments as far as an RV storage facility on that 4.68 acre site. What they're proposing to do is to include roughly 194 covered and uncovered RV parking stalls, as well as 24-hour on-site security, decorative perimeter walls, desert-friendly landscaping, so on and so forth. The existing designation for the site is rural residential, or RR, and the existing general plan designation is also rural residential. Currently, the RV storage is a conditionally permitted use only in a light industrial district, subject to a conditional use permit. The general plan update, from what I've heard this evening, designates the site as a mixed-use corridor, and that's probably a question I'm going to ask Rebecca from the Community Development Department to clarify, because we're right on the southeast portion of Beacon Road and Dillon Road, which you have a residential rural desert designation or a mixed-use designation. So the letter that I submitted to the Planning Commission for review had reference to a residential aspect of that, but I'm pretty sure that our site falls within what's being proposed as a mixed-use corridor designation. To the immediate east, you have an existing U-Haul facility that also falls within that mixed-use corridor designation. However, the mixed-use corridor designation does not allow currently, as proposed, an RV storage facility under the general plan update. So if we were to move forward without that site being designated for RV storage, as what's being proposed by the applicant and the property owner, we'd have to go through a general plan amendment and designate the site as light industrial. Something that I've experienced in the past is having represented another developer that was looking to develop an RV storage facility to the east side of Palm Drive, was the concern by the Planning Commission and City Council that if we were to change that designation to a light industrial use, that cannabis-oriented uses would be by default a permitted use subject to a conditional use permit. So what we've done in the process is reach out to staff and submitted our conceptual plans and landscape plans and site plans and so on and so forth as far as the RV storage facility is concerned. But for us to move forward with developing the site as an RV storage facility, it would have to be either in an industrial or a light industrial designation. Again, that brings up the issue with if we were to change that to light industrial, by default, it allows for cannabis oriented uses. In this case, the site is immediately to the west of the existing U-Haul facility off of Dillon, just west of the Palm Drive intersection with Dillon. So what we're recommending, or what we would recommend that the Planning Commission do is the Planning Commission forward a recommendation to the City Council that allows RV storage in the mixed-use corridor as a permitted or a conditionally permitted use. So one, we can be consistent with what's existing in the area immediately to the east of the subject site, but also other similar uses that are in the area. But also having our ability to move forward with RV storage to be allowed within the mixed-use corridor would help us maintain consistency with similar uses that are adjacent to the site, i.e. the U-Haul facility or other uses that are in close proximity. So what I'm doing is representing the property owner and hoping that we can have that designation, because currently we're, and maybe Rebecca can clarify during the response to our questions, I think I'm just literally southeast of the border of rural, residential, desert, and the mixed-use corridor. So one, I want to make sure that we're in that mixed-use corridor, but two, I'd recommend that we forward a recommendation to the City Council that we allow RV storages to be a permitted or a conditionally permitted use within the mixed-use corridor. And that concludes my comments. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Beauvais, Jennifer, I'm sorry, Rebecca will be responding to that. And what I want to put on the record is that this issue has been addressed in the past by the Planning Commission. And we did make a ruling, which I thought, but again, this will go into that question period, but I thought we had already agreed for you to be able to do this thing. So I'm a little confused at this point, but I'll get unconfused. It'll be fine. Okay, thank you so much, sir. Now, who's next?
The next three speakers are Mark Greenberg, Ricardo Ibarra, and Joshua Shemian. So Mark Greenberg will be first.
Thank you.
You've got me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I may be. I prepared a statement, but I think it's premature. It's about the 12885 Lesa Road property where the current good house sits at Patricia and Josie had already spoken about. So I think my remarks are premature.
Okay, Mr. Greenberg, thank you.
Unless you want to hear about what we're planning to do there, I'm more than happy to speak about
it. I think that would probably come up in a regular meeting.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate your call. Who's next, Joe?
Next speaker is Ricardo Ibarra.
Mr. Ibarra. Mr. Ibarra? Is Mr. Ibarra visible on your screen at all?
Yes, I can see him. I just can't hear him.
If you're on mute, sir, could you please unmute yourself?
Mr. Chair, we can probably move on to the next speaker, and then we'll circle back to Mr. Ibarra.
Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Okay, next speaker is Joshua Shemian.
Sir, go ahead.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
I wanted to say thank you guys for allowing me to speak. I think MIG has done a great job, especially Rebecca, you've done a great job as well. I'm calling to request an extension to the mixed use corridor that's across the street southeast of Karen and Scenic. I own the parcel on the northeast of Karen and Scenic. It is 2.8 acres, APN number 664-030-029. I believe with this extension, it will further develop the community as a whole. And due to the fact that there is a lot of residential housing on the west, most of it being developed, some not being developed, but there's infrastructure in place. I feel that us having a mixed use zoning on that side will further incentivize the residential developers to develop, as well as other commercial or mixed use developers to kind of catalyze that process of development in that area.
Thank you, Sarah. We'll put that on the list for Rebecca to answer at the end.
Thank you.
You're quite welcome. Gerald, next.
Okay, next three speakers will be Rick Rabuck, Peter Scott de la Torre, and Paula Smith. So Mr. Rabuck.
Hi, thank you very much. I thought Jose's presentation was great. You guys have obviously put a lot of work into this and it's appreciated. I have several questions. One, does the plan provide for protection of water rights for existing property well owners?
Sir, these will go into the queue with Rebecca. So go ahead and continue.
Can well, it's along the same lines, but do new property owners have the ability to drill new wells?
Again, those questions will be answered
on a similar note, just in the interest of the public here and property owners here, does the plan regulate and protect the local community from the MSWD pumping excessive water out of the aquifers here and selling it to the rest of the valley? I mean, I think that's a big issue for the entire community. I mean, particularly for the city.
Yes, sir. Again, that will be answered during that period.
As far as the rezoning, do banks actually recognize mixed use, not commercially zoned properties in the same way that they do commercially owned properties when it comes to refinancing? We've had issues with this in the past when we've tried to refinance to buy additional properties. And because we're in this gray area of zoning, and have you guys considered that? I guess that's my question.
Okay, again, that will be part of that list. And I'm anxious to hear the answer to that one too.
Thank you, Larry.
Quite welcome. Okay, who's next?
Next speaker is Peter Scott de la Torre. I don't see his name in the list of attendees. There is someone with the initials SS that I can allow to speak, and we can find out if this is Mr.
Scott, are you there? Scott? Okay, we should probably move on.
Okay, next speaker is Paula Smith.
Ms. Smith.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. First of all, Rebecca, great job, and Jose on the presentation, fantastic job. All of my questions and concerns have already been addressed, so I will pass and let you move on.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, Gerald, who's next?
Okay, so Paula Smith was the last speaker, but as I mentioned earlier, we can circle back to Roger Nunez to see if he is ready to address the council.
Is Mr. Nunez present?
Okay, I don't hear anything.
Mute Gerald, if you want to try unmuting him, see if he can.
Okay, if you've unmuted him, I'm just gonna yell out really loud. Mr. Nunez, are you there?
It's still showing muted on my end, Gerald. I don't know if it's showing it on yours or not.
Yeah, I'm clicking unmute and it's not doing it.
Mr. Chair, this is Commissioner Duffel. Might I entertain a 10-minute recess to allow the city clerk to see if we can get the phone line situated and also allow for us to have a brief restroom break?
Well, I think that's a good idea. Let's take 5 minutes, okay? Just 5?
Very good.
All right. So we're in recess for 5 minutes. Thank you.
So Gerald, if you want to try turning on the 3 speakers, right? We've got Roger Nunez, Ricardo Ibarra, and the SS, and see if we can get anyone on the line. And maybe if any of you can hear Mr. De La Torre or Ricardo Ibarra, if you want to comment in the question and answer or the chat that you are here, that way we can get you. Maybe you are able to. Okay, Mr. Nunez, I see that you are not able to unmute. I can, if you would like to ask your questions or your comments in this question and answer, I'd be happy to read it for you at the time that we return. We have 5 minutes, so you can, if you're able to type in your full question or comment, I'll be happy to read it since we can't seem to get you unmuted.
Is everybody back from break? I see you. I'm going down the line here. Augustine, you back? Not yet. Give it another minute or so. There you are.
I'm back.
Thank you so much. Okay, I think enough people are back, and I did only give us 5 minutes, but so I'm gonna rejoin, continue with this. Our last 3 speakers, anybody Gerald, is anybody responsive?
So we're having problems unmuting Roger Nunez. However, he did comment in the question and answer, and so I said I would go ahead and read for him. And he just says, I just wanted to add good job on the general plan. My question has to do with the traffic and street widening when time permits.
Splendid. I think we all have questions about that one. So I tried to call Mr. Delatorre on his line because I have his phone number and I couldn't get through to him. So I don't know what's going on there.
Okay. If you want to go ahead and close the public hearing at this point, I can, if you want to direct, I could go ahead and start answering questions.
That's exactly what I'd like to do. If there are no further questions in this area, then I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing. Thank everybody for their participation. It's been great. Okay, and now we'll go on to Rebecca's portion of answering all those dozens of questions.
So the first two questions dealt with having kind of a rehabilitation or detox facility in the visitor serving mixed use. So in our updated code, we have two different areas where this kind of use could be allowed. One is we have it in a commercial zone where it's a constructed living facility, and the other where it's out of a residential facility. The state has passed some laws, which you guys saw in an update recently, dealing with transitional and supportive housing. So the visitor serving mixed use does allow transitional and visitor serving uses as a right. The building would just have to be built to match the residential housing standards. So it would have to look like a house and meet the requirements of a house or a duplex or a triplex, which would allow it. It wouldn't allow in the visitor serving mixed use a commercial residential facility or assisted living facility, but would allow it as transitional supportive housing within a housing built to match the housing standards of the zone.
With regard to that, Rebecca, I'm going to ask this question then. This I understand, if I understand things correctly, just looking at the address, of course, it's something I'd have to recuse myself from because it's a block from me, but I believe that is a current spa. So would that be an acceptable?
Let me go ahead and share my screen so I can show you where we are at here. So they are right here, and they are discussing, my understanding from my phone conversations with them is they're actually looking at expanding into the adjacent properties and building something new, not necessarily converting the existing hotel. The conversion of a hotel into a commercial facility would not be permitted. Now, when I spoke with her, she did talk about different other kinds of uses. So it really would depend, you know, I kind of got a different conversation, was my understanding from my initial conversation versus what some of the other speakers were mentioning, an actual kind of live-in detox facility versus more of a rehab or a visit center. And so, you know, we would look at the use specifically that they were proposing. And my guess, as long as what they built, you know, in the adjacent properties dealt with, again, a residential house or a duplex that would be doing this facility, then it would be allowed under the supportive or transitional housing. They also asked why we changed the designation for that area. I can show you kind of there, you know, what we did is we looked at the blocks and how they were built, and we chose the mixed use zones instead of the commercial zones for ones that had, as you can see, kind of houses around it. And then for the commercial facilities were the ones that were mostly vacant or not built, or the only buildings were commercial buildings. So I can show you as well this before and after. This is the current land use designation where you can see it's kind of all mixed out, and as part of this update, we kind of cleaned it up to make one big visitor serving area, and then just separated what was mixed use, both residential and a commercial of hotels and spas, and the commercial uses. So this definitely was a neighborhood that has houses behind it, and felt that it made more sense to be in the mixed use zone instead of the visitor serving commercial zone. But as I said, there is ways to meet the code for what they're trying to do. They would just, if they purchase these additional properties as they kind of discussed, they would then just build a home and use it as transitional or supportive housing, depending on which one the definition would fall in, to do a rehab facility, because the state has basically allowed those by right in all residential zones now.
Thank you. That's quite a clarification. I appreciate that. Thank you.
So the next one is 665210001. So this is the, oh
dear.
That's not it. There we go. So this is one that was originally, as was mentioned by the speaker, an industrial use mixed with open space. So they had some developable area and some that was a water area. This was an area that was discussed at the workshop, at the, not workshop, excuse me, the study session with the council, that we were directed to update all of the uses that were in the MSHCP area, because we do have an MOU, an agreement to try and conserve these areas, to change these to the rural desert, residential rural desert. And as mentioned previously, even if the Planning Commission wanted to recommend this to be changed back to industrial, that would not meet the requirements of our EIR, because that would increase the intensity of the zone and would throw off the EIR.
Oh.
And again, this is one that was specifically directed to the staff by council to update all of the areas within the MSHCP to the rural density. The next one that was brought up was the RV area. Let me pull up. So it is confirmed that property is located within the mixed use commercial. Our current zoning does not allow for any RV facilities in anywhere as mentioned, but in industrial. So we did not make that staff proposed change, and is leaving that consideration of allowing RV by CUP or by right in the different commercial zones up to the Planning Commission and Council. So that was not a staff proposed change, because staff felt that would have been a big change to our commercial zones, and but did make sure that wanted to make sure that that comment is available for discussion and change at Planning Commission's recommendation.
Rebecca?
Yes.
This is Larry. I need to ask the question. I believe that this development was addressed during this Planning Commission meeting 2 years ago.
So obviously, I've only been here a year and a half. They have not submitted a formal application in environmental. So I don't know what would have been discussed if it was under a previous discussion or application, but I do not have any record of the zoning code being updated or changed to industrial, which I believe that when it was discussed before, we have had discussions about RV at council, and they did not want to change it to industrial. So I think that's the only conversation that's been had, not a discussion on whether RV uses would be permitted in the commercial zones and which commercial zones we would.
Okay. With the abundance of caution, I would like to see if the staff could review because I believe I'm probably the only commissioner who was on the Planning Commission at that time. I could be wrong. Does anybody else remember this one? Jim, were you around?
So we did have an RV that we looked at in another area of the city on Palm that I remember.
It's on Palm and Dillon, right?
There was another one that was taking place over here on this side that we did discuss.
Oh, I see. Okay, so we're looking at something different?
Correct.
Oh, well, never mind. Sorry. I know the one we were looking at.
The one area staff did add RV is the commercial business park zone, because that is more of a mix between very, very light industrial and commercial. But again, if the commission would like to consider this, that's within the commission's purview to make a recommendation to the council should they wish.
Well, thank you for straightening me out on that one, because I tell you what, I thought I was going senile. I could remember specifically the discussions.
Okay.
So this is a new one I don't know anything about, and that's fine.
Okay. So the next one was a request to extend the mixed use up to this area. And so although city staff sees a benefit and would support this kind of change, this would also be an increase in intensity that would not be able to be done due to our EIR. But I would definitely tell the applicant that if he came through with an application for a project and a general plan and zoning amendment, that staff would definitely see this as an area that would make sense, because he's got a natural break with this area here, and could be seen as a nice extension to the mixed use. It's just, unfortunately, as I said, we do have some restrictions and limitations with the environmental impact report and the way that we have to do that process. Basically, we have to take the land use map and determine what the traffic, what the intensity of growth is going to be, and increasing the intensity would throw our environmental impact report off and open us up to a lot more concerns. So the next one is, I had a few questions regarding water. So let me open that back up. Let me stop my share here. So I like to, he actually typed it in the questions and answers, so I didn't have to write it full on. So I thank Mr. Rick for that. His first question was, does the plan protect for water rights wells to existing property owners? We are not changing our code as it relates to that. In fact, we actually go to the county. The county manages that process for well permits. So that doesn't have an effect one way or the other. This plan does not change the water well rights for existing well owners. Same thing for properties to drill new wells. That permit is through a different agency and through the County of Environmental Health, I believe. And this does not address it one way or another. We work through them. Next question also is, again, regulating and protecting the local community from MSWD, pumping excessive water from local aquifers. Again, the city does not have authority over MSWD. They are their own agency under the state. And so the city does not have authority to regulate MSWD. And so therefore this plan does not regulate another agency. Same as we couldn't regulate a school district or the county itself. The water agency is a government entity on its own and not above or below the city. And so therefore we do not have that. Another question he asked but did not verbalize was dealing with the Walmart project and that specific plan change. That was a project that was approved by council through a voter initiative. So that's one of the reasons that we're changing, because we are required by law to keep it as it is proposed, because it would require either another voter initiative or the applicant making the changes. So I appreciate that question, but the city is, the reason staff's making that update is because we're trying to comply with the law on updating it to a specific planning area for the land use map to protect that voter initiative. The last question he asked was about banks recognizing properties that fall into mixed use. I can't really answer that. I'm not a bank, but I can answer that mixed use zones are becoming more and more common. There are an awful lot of cities that allow it now. Our description is very clear in our code, and I tried to make sure that we did that it says it can be standalone commercial or standalone residential. So I'm hoping that as this filters out and they have those properties, that it's very clear to the banks that it can be developed either or both. So we made very clear to put that in the description, that it can be that zone allows for standalone commercial if they're trying to get financing for a commercial project. So I did my best, and if we find that there's problems moving forward, possibly it's something we can clarify in the zoning ordinance as needed moving forward if we hear that there's continual issues. And then the last question was the one I read from Mr. Nunez, and that was questions about traffic and street widening when time permits. As I mentioned earlier, we have a mobility plan. That mobility plan allows us to use our general plan for future capital improvement projects and grants. And so we, you know, when time permits, it's more of a function of the city council and the capital improvement process and those public hearings. But we did try and make sure that we captured, again, the build out needs of our main arterial roads within that mobility element. And that's all the questions I have from the public. I'll be happy to answer any additional questions the Planning Commission has.
Thank you. Does anybody on the commission have a question?
This is Commissioner Duffel. Rebecca, just for some clarification on the streets and road widening and whatnot, the residential streets are also included in that plan, correct?
Say that one more time, I'm sorry.
The standard residential streets are also included in that plan as far as build out for curbs, gutters, street widening.
So usually residential streets, we just have adopted county standards. They do not include our mobility plan. If you look at the circulation element, does not include every residential road. It only contains the main roads. The other roads are adopted through our Public Works Department and, you know, municipal code. And I believe what we've just adopted is the Riverside County Road Standards.
Okay, and the purpose for that question is I've been getting a lot of questions myself in regards to our residential roads within the city and the tax dollars that have been going out to get those developed over the years. So I wanted to make sure we got clarification for the community. Thank you.
Okay, and if I may add, there was one more question commented. He did not speak, and I don't know. And it was a Mr. Haliprin, and he asked something about his parcel on Dylan and Nancy that he found out was in the MSHCP and the flood zone, and that he was upset, that he wanted to know what his options were, and again, devastated. He also asked if he could get a copy of the zoning map with street names. Obviously, our plan in the future, once this all is adopted, is to actually, the map that I shared with you, where you can search your address or APN, will become a public-facing map. So people can go on and type their parcel number or their address and see what their zone and their general plan designation is. And so it's just something we didn't make public yet because we were actually doing some of these updates until the last minute. So the only map that we do have available right now is the paper map that you can be zoomed into, but it can't have, there's not enough room to put every street on it. But anyone out there who would like questions before the council, want to know what their current designation is and what their proposed designation is, can absolutely email me at rdeming, that's RDEMING at cityofdhs.org, and I'll be happy to respond. And that's what I've been working with a lot of people over the last week since our notices went out, to let people know how this might affect them. And that's all I have from the questions and answers that came up. So,
any other questions? Jim, you have anything? Okay. Augustin, anything?
No questions.
Okay. Again, I think that the staff has done an excellent job on this. I think that the public's participation in this, I think, has been wonderful. So I want to thank the public for their participation and their attention to this. This is a very important thing, knowing that nothing's perfect and nothing is ever going to satisfy everybody on everything. It's just the way it works. But with that, I'm ready to move on. If we don't have any other questions, is there any discussion among the commissioners?
So I apologize, I didn't write this one down. You did have one, the Shada, that did ask about, she had a question, and I see on the comment that she would she get a response as well, but I did not write down that she had a question, just that she'd love to continue building. And so I don't know if someone else has a note on exactly what question she had, so that I can make sure that I answer everybody.
I'm looking at it. I thought in her comment that she, her question basically, excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm looking at her letter right now. I have the whole stack here. Was that she was concerned about her property being allowed to go into the visitor service commercial. Serving commercials. She was right next to Bubbling Wells Ranch, which we had
Okay.
done that designation.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, her comment, I didn't write it down, but you're right. She did have a written comment. Let me go ahead and share my screen to show her area again. So I believe she's in one of these zones. I believe she's this property here. I'm not sure if she owns additional property, but she is requesting to change from residential low to the visitor serving commercial. That, again, as previously discussed, that would, we've talked to our consultant when we got that letter, and that would be an increase in density because it would be going from residential to a commercial use. So although another one that staff could see supporting a project when she's ready to develop, that would be accompanied by a general plan amendment and zone change with the environmental associated with the project, that would be able to do that. And I don't see any concerns with staff supporting something like that. Obviously, we don't have the details for the project, but in terms of just the change, it is adjacent to the bubbling wells, and staff sees no initial concerns for that kind of thing.
Thank you so much for addressing that.
If there's any other written comments that commission would like me to address, just let me know and I'll be happy to address it.
I don't have anything. Does anybody else have anything? I think it's about time to move on. So with that, there's a recommendation that we adopt 3 resolutions. I believe, and Gerald, this is where you come in, that we probably would have to vote on each one separately.
So yeah, I would recommend voting on each resolution separately, and what we can do is possibly make one final 4th motion to cover the additional motions that we asked. And I can maybe have Jose put that up when we're ready, that deals with the additional changes, basically recommending to council the additional changes that staff showed and supported, recommending us to make some non-substantive changes, and recommending approval with those changes for both the zoning and the general plan changes. Was there anything I missed, Jose, on that additional motion? I was remembering there were 3, and now I'm
Yeah, there's quite a bit here. So
There was 3. There was one to include the revisions that were in the staff report or in the staff presentation. One that we will look at the wind and energy policies and requirements down the road.
Okay, so yeah, so the 3rd item was the wind and energy policies to be incorporated, review and incorporate in our future zoning updates as warranted.
Mr. Chair, this is Commissioner Duffel. If we're ready, or when staff is ready, if staff can put something in the form of a motion for me,
Yes.
I would be more than happy to
So I'll go ahead.
propose a motion on all of these to move staff's recommendation.
So I'll go ahead and start with the first one. So the first one is staff is recommending that the Planning Commission approve a resolution of the Planning Commission recommending that the City Council adopt a resolution of the City Council of the City of Desert Hot Springs, California, 1, certifying the environmental impact report, 2, adopting findings of fact pursuant to the California Environmental Quality Act, and adopting a statement of overriding considerations, and 3, approving the general plan amendment and land use map number GPA-20-1, amending the general plan and land use map for several properties in the city.
I hereby make that my motion as read by Ms. Deming.
Thank you so much. Do we have a second?
I second it.
Thank you, Mr. Nindell. Is there any discussion on this motion among the commission? Seeing none, let's go ahead and vote. Gerald, can you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Aragon?
Aye.
Commissioner Duffel?
Aye.
Vice Chair Nindell?
Aye.
And Chairman Buchanan.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Can we move on to the second one, please?
So the second one is a resolution of the Planning Commission recommending the City Council adopt a resolution of the City Council of the City of Desert Hot Springs, California, repealing the following specific plans, which in light of the new general plan amendment GPA 20-1 and zoning amendment ZA 20-1 are outdated. 1, Desert Highlands specific plan, 2, Eagle Point specific plan, 3, Indian Hills specific plan, 4, Mountain View Estates 2 specific plan, 5, Arroyo Vista / Rancho del Oro specific plan, 6, the Vortex specific plan, 7, Indigo Lake specific plan, and 8, Vista del Monte specific plan.
This is Commissioner Duffel, and I would like to motion to make the recommendation to City Council as presented by Ms. Deming.
Thank you very much. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Aragon. Okay, is there any discussion among the commission? Hearing none, let's go ahead and take a roll call vote. Gerald?
Commissioner Aragon?
Aye.
Commissioner Duffel?
Aye.
Vice Chair Nindell?
Aye.
Chairman Buchanan.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Splendid. Let's go to the third one.
Third recommendation is a resolution of the Planning Commission recommending that the City Council adopt an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Desert Hot Springs, 1, amending or adding the following chapters of the Desert Hot Springs Municipal Code. A, 17.04.050 definitions, B, 17.08 residential districts, or 17.12 commercial districts, D, 17.14 mixed use districts, E, 17.16 industrial districts, F, 17.64 administration, G, 17.74 administrative conditional use permits, and 2, amending the zoning map in accordance with the zoning amendment number ZA-20-1.
And again, this is Planning Commissioner Duffel. I would like to move for recommendation to the City Council, staff's recommendation as just read by Ms. Deming.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Duffel. Do we have a second?
I'll second that one also.
Thank you, Commissioner Aragon. So with that, is there any discussion?
Yeah, oh, sorry, go ahead.
You have something?
Trying to move too fast, I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem. So hearing that there's no discussion among the commission, let's go ahead and go to the vote. Gerald?
Commissioner Aragon?
Aye.
Commissioner Duffel?
Aye.
Vice Chair Nindell?
Aye.
And Chairman Buchanan.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Okay,
So the final requested motion is that the Planning Commission recommended council all of the additional changes that were identified in our presentation today that were not included in the original agenda posting, that the Planning Commission direct staff to review the Riverside County general plan and zoning ordinance to incorporate as needed into our zoning ordinance when the city does a future zoning ordinance, and finally allow staff to make updates to the general plan and zoning ordinance if we find typos or other non-substantive changes. Thank you.
thank you, Rebecca. And I'm going to take a kind of a privilege here, and I want to move this motion. We have a second, please.
I will second you, Chair Buchanan.
Thank you so much. So, any discussion? All right, then let's go ahead and have the roll call vote. Gerald?
Commissioner Aragon,
Aye.
Commissioner Duffel,
Aye.
Vice Chair Nindell,
Aye.
and Chairman Buchanan.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Okay. Needless to say, I'm very pleased with this meeting and everybody's participation. Gerald, you've done a fantastic job taking care of us, and the staff has just been amazing. Also, the Mr. Rodriguez, and I don't think we got to meet the other person, but our consultants have been very good. And again, I want to say, just from the bottom of my heart, how much I appreciate the input from the community. It's really been great. And that's the way things work in a democracy, is when the community is involved. With that, are there any other commission reports or anything?
Mr. Chair, if I may indulge the commission for just a moment.
Sure.
I would just like to say thank you to our Desert Hot Springs first responders. Here in my home, we suffered a loss last week. Near and dear friend of the family, 31 years old, who was a Marine veteran. And I want to give kudos to our Desert Hot Springs, our Riverside County Fire, and our AMR responders that responded. They were top notch through the whole thing. And I've never had a bad experience in our community with our first responders. So I'd just like to give them a shout out and a thank you for everything that they do for our community.
Thank you, Richard. Commissioner Aragon. So the baby's eating and growing and getting big and all that good stuff?
Yes, sir.
All right, I'm so pleased to hear it. It'll continue to happen before you know it. Like I said earlier, my baby, 46, about a week ago, or 2 weeks ago, I'm sorry. But just that concept, yeah. And I know Commissioner Duffel recently had a birthday in his family. And 21, right, Richard?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
See, there you go. Time flies. You just never know how quick that's going to go.
That's for sure.
Jim, do you have anything?
No, I don't. I do want to say I'm very impressed also. I know everybody keeps saying this, but I've never been involved in the general plan up until the last year or so. And I'm just amazed at the work that goes into it and the commitment. It's very impressive. That's all I want to say.
It's huge. And I don't think any of us can say enough about how well the staff has performed on this. Okay. I'm going to move on. Community Development Director, do you have a report? Rebecca, are you there?
Yep, I'm just pulling up my notes. I apologize. So I don't have anything. Obviously, a lot of our comments were leading up to this. So I'm happy to be here presenting this general plan. I can let you know that we still have a full agenda the next few meetings, and we're putting together and making sure that we don't have choice. I'm not making sure. We're keeping busy here, even dealing with what's going, with the pandemic that's going on. We still have a lot of applications that are processing. We have a lot of applications we should see, not just in the next few months, but moving forward. We have a few projects that have been waiting for this general plan approval to move forward. And so this next year should be very interesting.
Yeah, my expectation is that we'll be continuing Zoom meetings for a while. That's my guess, but I hope I'm wrong. Not that I don't like doing this. It's just, it's nothing better than having face-to-face stuff going on. Anybody have anything else? We had a possibility of having somebody who wanted to talk who didn't have an opportunity before. So we can reopen right now. Public comments, is there anything?
The only person that I have was Roger Nunez, but we had issues earlier with him unable to unmute his mic. We can try it again.
Mr. Nunez, can you hear me?
Okay, it's not working this time around.
Yeah, his questions, I assume, were still just related to the general plan, and we did read those off. So I don't know if he had any additional general comments, but we did cover him with. He did text Mr. Nunez. If you wanted to again type any other general public comments you'd like to speak, I'll be happy to read them for you. He just says, good job, everyone. Can't wait till the next meeting.
Me either. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. This meeting is adjourned.